Okay, welcome to the Apple Podcast by Lex at Mac's Future. And today is June 17th, 2011, a Friday. And there's all sorts of Apple-related news to talk about. So let's get to it. Okay, so the first story to talk about is Apple finally gave clarification as to what enterprise and schools will do regarding how Lion is purchased and distributed and installed in computers. Because there had been some hubbubaloo, I guess last week, when Apple announced that Lion, which is going to be released soon, probably in July, that it's only going to be, released as a download through the Mac Store, through the Mac App Store. And a number of companies or, Apple support third-party vendors who help small businesses and enterprise with their Macs and other Apple equipment were kind of peeved by, this announcement, because their concern was, what are they going to do with enterprise? That means big business or government or schools in terms of installing and updating Lion, because what Apple announced for everyday people is that if you have the Mac App Store and Snow Leopard, when Lion comes out for just a mere $29.99, you just go to the Mac App Store and download it, install it. So people who provide support for enterprise were all worried, how is that possible? Are we going to have to download from the Mac App Store for every computer? That would be very burdensome for a lot of big businesses and schools, because imagine how much that internet access they have would be clogged. Because let's say you had a company with 1,000 computers, so each of those thousands computers would download 4 gigabytes from the internet. That would really clog their internet service. And so enterprise, people who support enterprise were very concerned. And frankly, as someone like me, I've got an investment in Apple, and I always think that, look, Apple, I'd love for Apple to be in the enterprise more, because, where I work in the enterprise, there's really hardly any Apple devices, and I've been using Windows computers for years. And, whenever I would say, well, why don't we have a Mac or something, the IT people in the place that I would work and say, well, that's not really for enterprise. So to the extent that Lion in any way is bad for enterprise, is going to be used by people who are entrenched in Windows to say that Apple and Lion aren't up to snuff for the enterprise. But today in MacRumors.com, there's a story on Friday, June 17th, and I guess they found Apple released a PDF documenting how Lion will be purchased for business and education. And here's the key thing. First of all, you can purchase, it's still going to be a download, but here's the key thing. You can purchase licenses at a minimum of 20 licenses a pop for business enterprise at the same price of $29.99. Frankly, for businesses, that's a steal. And Apple can really make inroads in big business at $29.99, $30 a pop for a computer, because believe me, big business is paying Microsoft big bucks for each license of Windows on a Windows computer. So if the enterprise wants to upgrade to Windows 7, believe me, it's a lot more than $30 to upgrade each computer to Windows 7. So Apple's going to still charge just $29.99 per license, and for enterprise you can buy 20 licenses at a pop. And get this, education customers with a minimum license of 25 licenses can purchase not only Lion, but a bundle of Lion, the iLife, and iWork software at $39 per license. So think of that. For just $9 more, each school computer is going to get an update of Lion plus an update of iLife plus iWork. So that's quite a deal. So here's how it works in terms of installation now. They basically, you get a volume license, just one license for the whole volume. So let's say you want to, I don't know, buy 1,000 licenses. So you get one redemption code for each contract. And the code can be used to download Line from the Mac App Store. So you download one copy with the redemption code, and the Line installer will download to the applications folder, but will not install immediately. This Line installer is then used to install Lion on other systems. So you download once and install many times. So what's going to happen is an administrator or an IT person will pay for the 1,000. Let's say it's a 1,000 computer enterprise place. They'll buy the license and get the redemption code, download one version of the Line installer, and then they're going to be able to use that installer to make mass installations on multiple machines. They can copy the install Line application from the Mac App Store to each target system, and then once it's copied, the installer will be launched and Line will install in place. There is no need to boot from an external disk. That's pretty cool. Administrators will also be able to use system image utility in OS Lion server to create net install or net restore images. So I think this solves the problem. I mean, frankly, it's very easy. If big business or a school has a network, a LAN of computers, they can now just sort of push them out after they install one installer. So this is really a great solution. And frankly, at $30 a pop, don't you think enterprise, big business is going to think seriously about switching from Windows to Lion or Apple, because it's much cheaper. So it's something that we should really look at if you're a business person. Another big story that came out, I guess, earlier this week is that Apple, just out of the blue, announced that it was selling unlocked iPhone 4s in the United States. Now, this is big news because for the longest time, you could not get an unlocked iPhone in the United States. And what does unlock mean? Unlock means that you don't have to use it with just one carrier. That, like, right up until recently, if you bought an iPhone on AT&T, and let's say you wanted to go overseas and put a different SIM card in it from another carrier that had like the GSM technology, you couldn't do it. You couldn't do it unless you jailbroke the iPhone, which would mean that, contrary to Apple's and AT&T's wishes, you did a software hack to install an alternative store into the iPhone, that's Cydia usually, and then use some tools to change the settings in the iPhone so that a foreign carrier's SIM card would work. And that the common people wouldn't know how to do that. Everyday people who get iPhones wouldn't know how to do that. You'd have to be sort of tech savvy and a hacker or of some sort to do it. But in other countries, Apple did sell iPhones that were unlocked, mainly because foreign countries had regulations that said a carrier could not sell you a device and then have it only work on that device, but if it had the means, it could work on another carrier's networks. Well, Apple, for some reason, changed its tune and announced that you can buy an iPhone 4 unlocked. And the way that works is there is no carrier assigned to it. And if you want to use it in the United States, you go to AT&T and buy a SIM card and install it. Now, because it's unlocked, there's no subsidy because there's no contract when you buy it. Because remember, normally, prior to this, if you buy an iPhone in the United States, you got to buy it with a 2-year contract, and that gives a subsidy. And with the subsidy, usually the 32 gigabyte iPhone, cost about $300, and the 16 gigabyte iPhone 4 cost $200. Well, the unlocked iPhone 16 gigabyte without the subsidy is a full $649, and the 32 gigabyte model is a full $749. Now, that's a lot of money. But why would you pay that? You would pay that because then you're not locked into a contract, and you can, without doing any jailbreaking, you can take the iPhone and run it on some carrier other than AT&T. Now, this unlocked phone is really, in the United States, you can only really use it with AT&T or T-Mobile, because Verizon doesn't use SIM cards. You wouldn't be able to take this and have it somehow activated with Verizon. So it's really only for carriers that have micro SIM cards. So in the United States, that's really only T-Mobile, which is going to merge with AT&T if the government approves it. But even there, you don't have much choice, because apparently while T-Mobile uses GSM, it's on a different wavelength than the cell chip that's in the iPhone 4 in the United States. The cell chip on the iPhone 4 that's unlocked is designed to work 3G on AT&T's network. So you could put a T-Mobile SIM card and make phone calls in the iPhone 4 that's unlocked, but you wouldn't get the faster 3G cell phone data connection. You just have Edge, which is very slow. So I don't know why you would do that. I guess if you were just happy to use the iPhone 4 where you have Wi-Fi and like the cheaper T-Mobile rates. But you could, you might get the iPhone 4 unlocked and pay that extra money if you're a business traveler and want to use the phone overseas in countries that have GSM on the same waveform spectrum as AT&T, and you don't feel like unlocking and jailbreaking. You don't feel like jailbreaking your iPhone to do it. So there might be some businessmen who'd gladly pony up $749 so they don't have to go to the trouble of jailbreaking their iPhone. On the other hand, frankly, for someone like me, jailbreaking is pretty easy to do. And I would rather have the subsidy from AT&T because, frankly, in the United States, as long as I'm going to have a GSM phone, it's probably going to be on AT&T. One of the downsides of getting the iPhone on Verizon is there's no SIM card slot because Verizon doesn't use that technology for its phones. And so if you have a Verizon iPhone, even if you jailbroke it, well, I'm not sure if this is true, but I don't think you can use it abroad unless there was some way to jailbreak it so that if you went to other countries like Brazil that use CDMA technology, you could somehow hack it to, even without a SIM card, to work on with foreign carriers. But anyways, one theory is that Apple and AT&T are allowing this unlocked phone so that it would fuel the argument that AT&T isn't such a monopolist or dominant market player, and that it's not stifling innovation. And why would AT&T do that? It's because AT&T's acquisition of T-Mobile is up for a review in the coming year by the government, and AT&T probably wants it approved. So anyways, this is good news for people who want an unlocked iPhone and don't feel like jailbreaking. Okay, so this was also a big week because Apple's competitor, Google, finally released for sale its Chromebook concept laptop. And so what does that mean? I don't know if you remember, but earlier in the year, Google released in limited quantities a sort of a beta laptop called the CR48, which was essentially, a somewhat light laptop that doesn't really have an operating system. Its operating system is essentially a web browser, a Chrome, which is nothing more than a browser. And Google's been pushing the concept that you don't need a computer that, has an operating system and, stores a lot of data and programs on the computer, but rather that the future is the internet, the cloud, and that you would want a laptop that essentially had a browser that was this Chrome browser, and that everything was in the internet. And, I applied to get one of these CR48, computers because it was free. I didn't get one. But now Google has finally started selling on June 16th, I guess that was yesterday, the first Chromebook. And the first one was made by Samsung. It's called the Series 5. And it costs $500 if you get it with a cellular connection service in it, and $430 if it only has Wi-Fi and no cell phone connection. And David Pogue, the famed technology reporter for the New York Times, has an article that describes what this is and what its flaws or virtues are. And the article is entitled "A Laptop, Its Head in the Cloud." So, in the end, he doesn't think it's such a great idea, and he thinks it's going to be a failure. This is how he starts off the article. He says, "You can say all kinds of nice things about Google's Chromebook laptop concept. You can say it's ahead of its time, or that it's thinking way, way outside the box, or that as failures go, at least this one swung for the fences." So overall, I think his impression is that, it's not such a great idea. And this is what he says for his conclusion. "A laptop doesn't need a hard drive, doesn't need programs on it, doesn't need Windows or Mac OS X, doesn't need a desktop, files, or folders. Everything you need is online. So all the laptop needs is a web browser." He's talking about what Google is saying. So, he basically kind of trashes it. He says it's really weird to use a computer where everything happens in your browser. If you attach a hard drive or flash drive, you even see its contents in a browser window. You can never quit or minimize the browser. There's no desktop behind it, no matter what your instincts say. But let's give this shifted paradigm a chance. How well does Google's newfangled concept hold up in the real world? Unfortunately, not very well. That's what he says. So he makes some very good points. He says the first assumption is that you're online everywhere you go. That's rather critical because when it's not online, a Chromebook can't do much of anything. You can't pursue your email, read documents or books, or listen to music. With very few exceptions, when the Chromebook isn't online, it's a 3.3-pound paperweight. He goes on to say, Google says that an upgrade this summer will at least permit you to read your email, calendar, and Google Docs when you're offline, and that's over time. And that over time, more apps will be written to be offline usable. So, he is kind of stinging here. He says, maybe in Silicon Valley, where Google's engineers live, you can live your entire life online. But in the real world, you can use this laptop only where you can find and afford Wi-Fi hotspots or a Verizon cell signal if you bought the $500 Samsung model. And he points out that if you get the one with the cell phone service, you get free service for 2 years, but you're capped at 100 megabytes of data a month. To me, that's bait and switch, or 100 megabytes of data a month is nothing. This whole thing's supposed to be an internet browsing device, and you're going to chew through 100 megabytes in like a day or two. So that's kind of deceptive to say it's free for 2 years with only 100 megabytes per month. And basically, if you want to go above 100 megabytes, for 1 gigabyte of data, it's $20 a month. And for 5 gigabytes of data is $50 a month. So that's really expensive. And that's with no 2-year contract is required. So, and then he points out, that he took this device on an airplane and, he had to use it, he had to have Wi-Fi every time he used it. So that's $13 every time you fly. Because if you don't have a Chromebook, if you have a regular computer, you can load it up with videos and things to read, and you don't need the Wi-Fi or to pay for the Wi-Fi. Then he points out that every time you travel with this device to a hotel, you got to get the $17 crummy Wi-Fi from the hotel, because otherwise you can't use the device. So, I guess he's basically saying this is a bad deal. I mean, in the end, he's kind of forgiving a little bit. His second to last paragraph says, "For now, though, you should praise Google for its noble experiment. You should thrill to the possibilities of the online future. You should exult that somebody's trying to shake up the operating system wars." So, look, I mean, I think $500 for this device, it's not worth it, because for the same amount of money, you can get an iPad. You can get the 16 gigabyte iPad with Wi-Fi, and you're going to have storage on it, and you can load it up and watch movies on it. You can read books offline, and it's a true internet browsing device when you have the Wi-Fi, but it's highly useful when you're offline. So I don't know. I think that these Chromebooks are going to fail. Maybe in some distant future, when truly high-speed internet is everywhere and cheap and free and ubiquitous, then that makes sense. So maybe Google should really, spend billions of dollars if they really want everybody to be on the internet all the time and have things like the Chromebook. What Google should do is just basically build free internet access, either Wi-Fi or cellular, all across the country in every nook and cranny. But the truth is, you don't have that. Cell phone internet connections, particularly in the big cities, are sketchy and slow and frustratingly slow. And then there are places where you can't get any internet access. I ride the New York subways a lot, and there's no internet access. And, I ride sometimes 30 minutes at a time on the subway. Millions of people do. And they love their iPads and Kindles and other devices that work without an internet connection. And, it's kind of presumptive of Google to think that everyone's going to have an internet connection all the time. It's just not happening. This debate about what Google's doing with the cloud and the Chromebooks wasn't limited to just the Chromebook. There was actually a very lively debate online regarding Apple's vision with iCloud, which was announced last week, in which we discussed regarding the WWDC announcement, and Google's vision of iCloud. And there was some criticism of Apple, or some concern about how Apple's going to do iCloud as a replacement for MobileMe. And there was a back and forth, and the back and forth concerned Jonathan Toplowski, who used to be of Engadget, who is now of thisismynext.com, and the famous John Gruber of Daring Fireball, and who else? Someone named Pascal Emmanuel Gorby. So the best place to really read about this debate is really Daring Fireball, John Gruber's website. His Tuesday, June 14th post, It's All Software, sort of sums out the debate and gives his view of it. And I generally agree with his view. But here's what the debate is. He points out that Pascal Emmanuel Gorby, writing about iCloud, wrote, "Here's how Google and Apple's vision of the cloud differ. For Google, the cloud means cloud plus web. For Apple, cloud computing means cloud plus software, with the internet stuff happening behind the scenes. All of the cloud computing services Google offers to consumers, like email, word processing, and spreadsheets, happen within the browser. To Google, the point of cloud computing is to replicate desktop software with the web." So that's an interesting sort of view of things. I kind of agree and don't agree. And Gruber says many, maybe even most observers share this view of the difference between Apple and Google's approach to cloud-backed service. I think this view is wrong. And he goes on to say, where Gobry writes, for Google, the cloud means cloud plus web, he glosses over what web is. Web apps like Google Docs and Gmail don't somehow obviate the need for client-side software. They just changed where the client-side software runs and what API it is written against. In both cases, there are client-side user-facing apps and back-end services and canonical storage running on services in the cloud. We don't talk about Ajax much anymore because it's become so ubiquitous, but what it means is client-side software written in JavaScript, running in a web browser, communicating with a server using APIs. And then he goes on, I'll skip over, this is a very good post and lengthy, and then he sort of takes on Josh Topolsky a little bit, because Topolsky, as he points out in his piece questioning Apple's commitment to web-based apps, wrote, there is no native application for the Mac or iOS that replicates the shared document editing of Google Docs. There is no mail application that exists for the Mac which will allow me to access my important information from anywhere in the world with or without a device in hand. There is no photo sharing service for iOS or the Mac which is as flexible or accessible as Flickr. Now, Topolsky also was claiming that his sources at Apple and following out on iCloud led him to believe that Apple is going to dump all the web hosting stuff on MobileMe for iCloud. In other words, right now, MobileMe, you can log in just through a web browser into your email on MobileMe. On MobileMe right now, you can access Gallery, which is a photo hosting and video hosting site. And also, you can also access iWeb, which allows you to create like your own website and host it on MobileMe. Now, Apple has announced that iWeb is going away, but Apple was quiet as to what it's going to do about like the calendars online through the web browser and email and the photos and the videos. And Gruber thinks that they may still have it, they just haven't announced it. And Topolsky thinks it's going away. But here's the debate, really, and I have a different way of thinking of it. And I think people are missing something here. And I think Gruber has his, is sort of right on. And here's the interesting thing. The internet is not a browser. I know this, what does that mean? The internet is not the browser. Well, if you think about it, most people think of the internet as their experience through a web browser. But what is a web browser? A web browser is essentially an application that runs locally on some device that you have. Even Google's Chromebook is a hardware. You have to have hardware. After all, you have to have some device to run something, right? You can't just have a cloud with nothing local. So even Google has something local. It doesn't have an operating system. Its operating system is essentially just an application, which is a browser. So there actually is a limited operating system, but it's a very simple operating system that just runs a browser. And the idea is that everything will happen in the browser. Now, why do I... Well, and so what that means is that the browser is using data on the internet. And what the internet is the ability of networks of data to communicate with each other and transfer the data back and forth across huge nodes of communications that go seamlessly back and forth like this incredible interconnected web. And the thing is, as Gruber points out, but I'm saying it differently, other applications can take advantage of the internet other than the web. So the thing is, Google views the internet as being something that ultimately should only be accessed through one application a web browser. Apple sees the internet as really a great resource for communication and data that can be accessed not only by one application, but by many applications. And so then you have many ways to access that data, not just by one application. And that's what's so limiting about Google. Now, Google would say, though, well, no, we're going to have applications within that one application. And so that's the difference. Google would view it as, let's have one application, a browser, and then sub-applications within the browser. Well, Apple's saying, sure, let's have a browser, but then let's have separate applications, maybe 500,000. And what I think Apple is saying, look, we can create better applications outside the browser that can better take advantage and be better portals to all that data and communications on the internet. While Google views it as just, okay, we're just going to have one application with like sort of mini applications woven into that application or run through the web or the internet. So that's the profound difference. So Gruber, I think, is making that point. He concludes and he says, when he's talking about Topolsky's point, the first clause isn't true, I'd argue. Shared document editing is not an inherent advantage of Google Docs being web-based. A native client could do it just the same. As the document changes, those changes are reflected live in your browser by way of a stream of API calls between your browser executing on some device in front of you and Google's remote web server. Shared document editing is a difficult problem to solve, and Google Docs deserves credit for solving it well, but it has little to do with being rooted in a web browser. The third clause is about public sharing, websites versus web apps. And agreed, Apple hasn't addressed how iCloud will replace MobileMe's galleries in this regard, and Flickr is better than MobileMe gallery anyway. But the second clause, this is what Gruber says, is there's no mail application that exists for the Mac which will allow me to access my important information from anywhere in the world or without a device in hand is key to Topolsky's argument. Access anywhere, where his argument falls down, is without a device in hand. Many depend on shared or even public PCs to access their Gmail and Google Docs accounts. But that's a different audience than Apple's. When I'm without a device in hand, never. That's a question mark he had. He says, when am I without a device in hand? Never. As with MobileMe, there will be web app interfaces for iCloud for those times when all you have is a web browser on someone else's machine. But Apple's vision for Access Anywhere is iPhone everywhere. So this is kind of interesting. I mean, I think Google's really sort of gambling with just going with browser technology for access to data and communications on the internet. Okay, so speaking of web and HTML and apps for Apple, I did something yesterday that was very interesting. You know, I'm not a developer. I don't really write code, but I've always been fascinated with the concept of, you know, people creating apps for the iPhone or the iPad, because I really do think that's the future of computing. And it's just so exciting, the whole concept of having an app. And, you know, about a week or two ago, Apple in the Mac App Store released the Hype app. Now, I've talked about Hype before, and Hype is a program for the Mac that a couple of developers who used to work at Apple created, and it's like under $30. And essentially, it's a very easy-to-use drag-and-drop program to create HTML5 content or websites that are animated. And what HTML5 is, it's like the latest standard in code to write web pages. So a lot of what you see on Chrome and Safari, that's HTML5. But HTML5 is exciting because, you know, you can create sort of animations and video that it's going to be, you know, the replacement for for Adobe's Flash. Now remember, Apple hates Adobe Flash because that's all that stuff you see on the web. You go to a lot of like restaurants, have like those animated web pages that run in Flash, and a lot of musicians have that, and wedding photographers have it on their websites. And Apple, remember, Apple doesn't allow Flash to run on the iPhone or the iPad, and Apple's a big proponent of HTML5. And Apple originally, even before it started having an app store, told developers for the original iPhone that they could just create web apps, and Apple has it so that it's very easy to save a web page or a web app to your iPhone or iPad and run it as a web app. Now, since then, Apple has sort of changed its tune because apps that are specifically written in Objective-C using the Xcode program that Apple has on the Macintosh, they tend to be better apps and look better and be able to run all the hardware that's on a iPhone or iPad better than a web app. And there is a lot of hardware if you think about it on an iPhone or an iPad. On the iPhone and iPad, you've got gyroscopes and accelerometers and what else? You've got audio input and output. You've got video camera. You've got a regular camera. You've got two cameras. You've got Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, cell phone connections. So you've got a lot, and GPS chip. So you've got all these sensors, if you think about it, sensors and communication devices, and it's you can be more precise about controlling all this stuff using the complicated Objective-C program. And I say complicated because for me, I've been trying to like figure out like Objective-C, reading like some books on it. And I got to tell you, I was never a developer or a programmer. I'm totally schooled in another profession. And just as a curiosity, because I consider myself tech savvy, I tried to learn the code, and it's really like above my head, or the learning curve just seems insurmountable. But along comes this Hype app, and this Hype app is sort of like the Keynote app on the Mac. Keynote is like PowerPoint, where you create slides, and you can create little animations by creating like sort of vectors where you say, I want this object to go to that object in X seconds. And you can do that in Hype, and it's really easy. And so I've been playing around with Hype, and then I learned that actually you can sort of create a hybrid between a web app and a native Objective-C app on the iPhone and iPad. And what do I mean by a hybrid? Well, a pure web app, all you do is go to a website on your iPhone or your iPad that's a web app on the web in your Safari browser, and just say, when you can select save to home screen, and that web page saves to home screen. And I forget, there is one web app I downloaded that was like a chalkboard. You could you could sketch like with chalk in this app, and that's the way you installed it. But there's other apps that are sort of hybrid. And they're hybrid because in Objective-C, in the SDK for apps on the iPhone and iPad, Apple gave apps the ability to run a web browser in the app rather than launching Safari on the iPhone or iPad. So that means there are some apps on the iPhone where within the app, which is an Objective-C coded app, you can see a browser, because there's some that I know, for example, like the Twitter apps that I have, if they have a link, I can quickly see the link in like a browser window that's built into the Twitter app. And then if I want to launch it in Safari, I press another button and it launches in Safari. But some people, particularly some people behind this web company called PhoneGap, realized that API that Apple has for the iPhone and the iPad SDK means that you could create something interesting in like a web browser and then find a way to put it in Apple's Xcode, which makes apps for the iPhone and iPad, and then have that content be in like the web app part of the web browser part of an app. So basically, this is where the fusion comes in, where you don't have a pure web app. You've got like sort of an Objective-C native app, but that has a web content in it. So PhoneGap has a plugin that's free that you download and you put it in Xcode, and using that and Hype, you can make an app very easily. I mean, it's not a very powerful app, but you can make it. And I made a little video that I put up yesterday, and the video shows you really how to make a simple app with no coding. And I don't know, I think it's pretty cool. But here's the thing about it, which is, what kind of apps could you make? And if you don't know the coding, the apps are going to be kind of limited. The apps that you could make using this technique of creating the app in Hype, then using PhoneGap, and then putting it in Xcode are something like a book, that interactive. Because in Hype you could create different like web pages that are linked to each other when you press a button or transition between. And so you could have an interactive book, like let's say you press a link or a button in the book and it takes you to a certain section. And also you can have interesting graphics, zooming in and zooming out. And so you could make it like a book that's an app for the iOS, the iPhone or the iPad. And you can, submit it to the store, because you could just get a developer's account for like $99 from Apple and use Hype to create your little, web content and submit it. So if you're looking at the video that I'm playing that I created, I just created a very simple 2 or 3 page app in Hype. Just said, welcome, Mac's future iPhone app. Now, the beauty of Hype is, though, that it gives you templates that are designed for, let's say, web content on an iPhone or an iPad. So you can pick the right size web page. Now, one concern that I do have with sharing all this information on how to do it is that people might create a lot of junky apps and flood the Apple App Store with that. And the reason I'm concerned is because already there is a lot of junky apps in the Apple iOS store on the iPhone and the iPad. There's a lot of just dumb content. But what's interesting is there was a story that came out today that the Kindle store for the Kindle is flooded with a lot of junky ebooks, because apparently it's very easy to create an ebook and submit it to the Kindle store. And actually there's a lot of knockoffs. Somebody writes an ebook and then people sort of take the same book concept and crank out like dozens of versions of the same book with slightly different names. And so people are referring to it as ebook spam on the Kindle store. But I'm worried that we're going to have app spam now on the iPhone and the iPad, because with this, this Hype program, it's really easy to create content on the iPhone or the iPad, and we might get just a flood of crummy books. And I hope actually that Apple polices the App Store more on the iPhone and iPad and sort of start making subjective quality judgments about programs, so we don't have just really dumb apps. So anyways, check out my video. It's also on YouTube, but it's the post that I put up on, I guess, the 16th of June. It's a tutorial, and I think if you're interested in Hype, you might want to check it out. It's kind of an interesting program, as is the technique to put it in in Xcode and then on an iPhone and iPad. So we'll see. Maybe I'll release a Max Future version app that people can get. Okay, so there was a really interesting article that came out this week that just shows how wildly successful Apple is. And there's a website called Asimco, and a guy who really sort of does a good job analyzing the economics and financial results of Apple, guy named Horace Dediu. And he has an article on June 17th, that's today, that's entitled Apple Could Buy the Mobile Phone Industry. And it's really straightforward analysis. It's not that long, but he basically says that, Apple is now coming to the end of the close of the second fiscal quarter, and that it's expected that Apple will have over $70 billion in cash equivalents, short-term marketable securities, and long-term marketable securities. In other words, that's Apple's piggy bank. And what he says is that figure has been growing predictably. And he also points out what that means. And he basically points out that with Apple's savings, because that's what you should really think of that's Apple's piggy bank, its savings. And that Apple could that the enterprise value of the public companies selling 75% of all phones sold worldwide are less than Apple's cash hoard. In other words, Apple could buy the big phone companies, the big mobile phone manufacturers, with its cash savings, with its piggy bank. And he points out, for example, that the enterprise value, that's what Nokia, like what it would cost to buy all Nokia stock at the current market price of the stock. Nokia is trading at a price that its total value of the company is $22.6 billion. BlackBerry RIM, its total value is $13.8 billion. HTC's total value is $25.4 billion, and Motorola Mobility is $4.2 billion. So if you add up those prices, Apple still would have enough money to, left over. Because look, 22 and 13 is 35 billion, make it 36, add 25, and you've got 56. You've got close to 70 billion. So, it's a pretty startling number if you think about it, that Apple, just with its cash alone, could essentially buy up, most of its competitors in the mobile space. Pretty interesting. Okay, so we know that Apple is now best friends with Twitter, and that Twitter is going to be heavily integrated in iOS 5. But what we've now discovered, based on a story from M.G. Siegler, who I think is a great columnist at TechCrunch, and who's actually, I think, dating Sarah Lane from the Tech TV fame, and who's in Leo Laporte's squad at Twit. M.G. Siegler had a breaking story on June 15th that Facebook has a secret plan to take on Apple on its own turf, on the iOS operating system for the iPhone and the iPad. And what the article basically says is that Facebook is planning some sort of like web app that you're going to be able to install just through the web on your iPhone or iPad, and then through that web app, Facebook is going to be able to like easily install web apps for sale, I guess, or on your iPhone and iPad. So I don't know how dangerous this is for Apple. I mean, Apple ultimately, if Apple really felt threatened by some sort of web app that would become like a stealth store that was installed on the iPhone and iPad and then like sold web apps that way, I think Apple, if it really felt threatened, would just prevent such web apps from being installed. On the other hand, I don't think Apple's going to have anything to worry on, because the bottom line is this: web apps just aren't that great. They don't run great on the iPhone and iPad. They're not as good as the native apps, and most people are going to go for the native apps because they're just better experience. They're not going to be into, and a lot of people even don't know that they can install a web page onto their iPhone or iPad. Because it's not like Apple's advertising that. I guess Facebook would have to advertise that. But again, Apple could just cut Facebook off. So why would Facebook really invest all in that? And why would app developers create apps that could run on the iPhone or iPad through this stealth web browser app that Facebook is developing? Because what if then Apple cuts them off? So anyways, I don't know. And frankly, I got to tell you, look, I don't think Facebook is so great. I don't think their website, their functions. I mean, frankly, the only thing I use with Facebook is occasionally post pictures, occasionally link stuff. And frankly, there's news out now that Facebook's growth is stalling and that Facebook is actually losing users. So I don't think Apple has much to worry about from Facebook. If anything, Facebook should be terrified that Twitter and Apple have made an alliance. I've been eyeing, and I guess a lot of people have been eyeing, the new iMacs that came out, I guess, a month ago. And the new iMacs, they sport the new Sandy Bridge processors, but they also support, the Thunderbolt connection. And they come with the option of the SSD drives. And if you want to, you can just get an SSD drive and nothing else. But the key thing is they have these Sandy Bridge drives that are really fast. And what really was kind of annoying is if you wanted to order it, you had to wait. With an SSD drive from Apple, you had to wait 5 to 6 weeks. Well, some are finally being delivered, and people are testing them out, and the speeds are pretty spectacular. And Cult of Mac today had an article about and a video showing how quick the 3.4 gigahertz SSD iMacs are launching all of its apps that come with it. And basically in the video, it took only 15 seconds to launch all the apps in an iMac running SSD. This is the top-end iMac. So that's blazing fast. And here in the video, they show how it's done. So let's play the video. And in the video, the guy selects all apps but 2. And boom, look how quickly. I mean, if you see this video, it's within seconds. Every, 15, 20 apps just pop open. So everyone says, I have the 2010 iMac, the 27-inch top-of-the-line one, and I've been toying with either selling it or getting it upgraded through Otherworld Computing to the SSD drive, because the future of Macs is truly the SSD drive. It's going to be a real game changer if you get it. Okay, so 9to5Mac had an interesting story reporting on data that came out regarding how movie streaming is doing on the internet and where Apple stands. And basically, a survey of web users was done by Citigroup's Mark Mahaney, regarding what people are using to buy or rent Hollywood movies or TV shows, and the results aren't that surprising. And in regards to the question, which website applications do you prefer to use for watching video online, 69% said YouTube, 27.1% said Facebook, 24.5% said Netflix, 22.5% said Hulu, and Apple iTunes was at 9.8%, and Amazon at 7.3%. So, Apple isn't in the front of, the front of the video content. Obviously, the free stuff on YouTube really dominates, and the free stuff on Facebook really dominates. And then for the paid stuff, Netflix dominates, followed by Hulu, followed then by Apple, and Apple's in front of Amazon. So Apple, really what counts is the paid stuff. And Apple, frankly, I'll tell you, Apple's is low because Apple's is much more expensive than Netflix. Apple doesn't have a streaming monthly subscription. For a mere, $9 or $8 a month, you get unlimited video streaming from Netflix. Apple instead has a rental model where it's at least $2 or $3 to rent one movie. So like, with Netflix, let's say you watched a movie every month, every day and every month. That's like 30 movies a month. Well, let's say it's $3 a movie to rent from Apple's iTunes. That's 30 times 3 would be like $90 instead of $9. Similarly, Amazon, has prices similar to iTunes. Apple, obviously is charging more. If Apple went to a streaming model like Netflix, which had a big library and a cheap monthly fee, Apple would get a bigger share of the movie market. Okay, thanks for listening to episode 76 of the Apple Podcast. This is Lex at maxfuture.com. And, if you like the show, please consider rating it in iTunes. Any positive review would be very kind. Again, you can leave voicemails at 617-826-9676 or email me at maxfuture@gmail.com. And I now have a Max Future Facebook page too, which I'll be linking on the maxfuture.com website. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.